Are you struggling to understand native speakers even after months of studying? You're not alone. I struggled with this for a while, but there is a way to fix it.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
I'm Hamid, I'm 16 and fluent in Spanish and 3 other languages. And that after video you saw took 120 hours, which is equivalent to about 30 minutes a day for 4 months. In this video I'll reveal my method to actually understanding natives without subtitles. A method that I can promise you most learners have never heard about. And by the end of this video you'll know how to catch words, phrases, and patterns that natives always use when they speak Spanish. And if you make it to the end of the video, then there's a free gift waiting for you. You know, you probably already know this, but real-world Spanish is different to what school and Duolingo and what most methods have been teaching us. You see, if I'd ask you how do Spaniards actually speak Spanish, you obviously would know that it's not hola, yo hablo español, you know it's hola hablo español. But the difference is actually even bigger than that. And I really want to emphasize a point here, that native speech isn't the same as text, okay? So let's go for some examples. So if we take these strings of words, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas. When you hear a native say that, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, aquí estoy, escúchame, es que hay muchos problemas, right? And so that might not always be the case, right? But if you're actually struggling to understand natives without subtitles, what you're really struggling with isn't actually understanding this. Because if you've been studying for a while, you probably already understand it with subtitles, right? Which means you understand the actual words themselves. What you don't have is the connection between the words and how they're said by natives, okay? Because if you read ¿Qué estás haciendo? No te entiendo, it's not the same as hearing ¿Qué estás haciendo? No te entiendo. Or hearing voy a ir al supermercado más tarde, whereas hearing voy a ir al supermercado más tarde. That's different, right? Más tarde instead of más tarde. Mercado instead of mercado, right? Escúchame instead of escúchame. Toy instead of estoy. The reason why you're struggling to understand natives when they speak without subtitles is because the way you've learned vocabulary in Spanish hasn't included real natives when they speak. And therefore, as a result, you haven't learned the connection between escúchame and escúchame, or the connection between es que hay and es que hay, or the connection between escondes and esconde. And the reason why that matters is because the extra layer that's being added is speed. Because when natives speak, they're doing this plus speaking very quickly. And that's when it starts to become almost impossible to understand natives. And so now that you understand that your constraint is that you haven't been actually listening to natives and creating a connection between how Spanish is written and how it is said by natives, let's go through the actual method that I used in order to understand natives and without having to rely on subtitles. So this method is what I like to call transcript training. And what we're trying to do here is get better at understanding spoken Spanish, because that's fundamentally your constraint. And so the way we do this is listen to spoken Spanish, of course, understand that spoken Spanish because we might not understand it before, and then repeat those 2 steps. And so there are millions of different ways to do this, right? There are millions of different ways to listen to spoken Spanish, understand the spoken Spanish, and repeat those 2 steps. But the specific way that we're going to do it is through transcript training. And the reason why we do this in this way is because we want to involve natives. And so the first step is to listen. So the first step is to listen. And the way I like to listen is to pick out native Spanish content. This is the key. Picking out native Spanish content that does have accurate subtitles or transcripts, hence the name transcript training. And the reason why we want to have accurate subtitles is because we want to be able to understand in the future. Because if you can't understand Spanish without subtitles, we want to be able to understand Spanish with subtitles and use subtitles as a tool. And so I start by just finding native Spanish content, and specifically content where natives are speaking to a level that I can't understand, without subtitles that is. Then we want to try to understand it. Now the way we're going to understand it is to translate the words, and this is where you turn on subtitles to find the words. And this is going to create a connection between how the word is said and what it actually meant, right? What did acá estoy mean? Oh, it meant acá estoy, right? And obviously if you understand acá estoy, then you don't even need to do this understanding step since you already understand. But let's say a native said something that you didn't understand, then you would use a translator to translate, and you would go on to SpanishDictionary.com in order to understand the grammar. And then we're just going to repeat that. And so the goal here is to understand the sentence without subtitles. And that's what you're trying to achieve when you clicked on this video. So what we're trying to do here is, real quick before we move on, after years of developing these frameworks and over 100 hours of coaching, I've packed everything into one clear step-by-step program. So if you're serious about learning Spanish, then check the link in the description to join. Back to the video. Create a strong bond between how Spanish is spoken by natives and how it is actually written and how you might have been learning, okay? And this is why in my program, the way I teach Spanish, I actually don't focus at all on written material. I purely only focus on spoken and audible materials because those are the only things that are used when we actually implement Spanish in a conversation. And so what transcript training does is it makes you start practicing native Spanish from day one. And therefore, from day one, these bonds between how Spanish is written and how it's said will be instilled in you. And so the more you repeat it, the better you get at it. And eventually the connection between written Spanish, of how it's written in subtitles, and how it's said will be so tightly bound together that you'll be able to understand Spanish without subtitles, because the connection between the subtitles and how it's said are so tightly bound that you already know what the subtitles would be, and you don't need to turn them on because you already know what they are, because you already know how natives say it and how it's actually written. And this is fundamentally what we did in English as well. The reason why you understand native English is because you've heard it all your life. You've done transcript training, but with native English. If you want to reverse engineer it, you understand English without subtitles, right? You might be watching this video without subtitles. Well, the reason for that is because you've been listening to native English your entire life. And so the connection between native English and written English is so tightly bonded for you that you don't need the subtitles. And so we're just reverse engineering that for Spanish. And that's why I would actually say that this method isn't a method, it's rather a model. It's what everyone has been doing for centuries. It's just that I've made it into a comprehensible method by having steps to it. But fundamentally, this is just a model, right? If you struggle understanding a language between how it's said and how it's written, fundamentally, this bond isn't there for you. And you strengthen the bond by doing an exercise where you listen to native Spanish and understand what it is. And the understanding step is where this bridge is made. And so it's the same as saying, if you want to get better at swimming, would you practice the swimming motions in A, in air, or B, in water? Well, if you want to get better at swimming in water, you should try to swim in water, right? You want to get better at understanding natives when they speak Spanish, we got to listen to natives when they speak Spanish. This whole idea of trying to listen to slow Spanish and then work your way up to fast Spanish, it's not how it works. You probably have heard of this. I think they're called like dreaming Spanish or something. It's where you start by listening to slow Spanish, very low level Spanish, and then eventually you try to understand faster and more native sounding Spanish. That's not how this works. Because when you listen to content and then try to understand what they're saying, what you're doing is you're bridging the gap between how spoken Spanish sounds and then what it actually means in written Spanish. But when you have spoken Spanish that's slow, you're building these bonds between slow Spanish and written Spanish. So you're able to understand slow Spanish. But then when you move on to fast Spanish, then these become useless because of how different slow spoken Spanish is versus fast spoken Spanish is. If they were both basically the same thing, then some of these bridges would apply here, but they don't. And this is the exact same reason why, if you've been studying Spanish in school for years, it's because you've built all these bridges between these arbitrary goals and arbitrary exercises that don't actually serve you. And when you get into a real world situation, these don't bridge the gap. And so that's why like videos like these are even required in order to bridge this gap. And that's what this video and this framework that I taught you would do for you if you implemented it. And so here's that free gift I was talking to you about. If you check the description or the pinned comment, then you can grab my free, easy to use Cognate cheat sheet, where you'll instantly be able to unlock thousands of Spanish words. And it's just a free PDF, no email needed, no need to opt in. You just click the button and boom, you get it for free. It's just my Frankie gift for reaching to the end of this video. Otherwise, I'd really appreciate it if you liked, subscribe, and did all them YouTube metric things that help me. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed. Stay humble.